So now I'm going to turn it over to a longtime Mountain Mooter, Jason Neiffer, to make our introduction to our keynote today. So Jason, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. So it's my distinct pleasure this morning to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Wes Fryer, who is our opening keynote for this year's Mountain Moot. Wes has nearly 30 years of experience asking the very profound question, how can we help students use technology to explore places near and far, find answers to their own questions, and share their stories with the rest of humanity? Wes has a Master's of Arts in Education and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction from Texas Tech University. He's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy, and he was also a Fulbright Scholar. Wes has taught and supported students at all levels of education, from elementary school through university environments, and he served in leadership roles, including Director of Technology and College Director of Distance Learning. Wes has been named a PBS Learning Media Digital Innovator, a Google Certified Teacher, and an Apple Distinguished Educator. But Wes himself is a media powerhouse, authoring 3 books and numerous articles, maintaining a blog for as long as there's been blogs, and also publishing several weekly podcasts, including the podcast that I'm honored to join him on every week, the EdTech Situation Room, which is a podcast that's been going for 4 years now in an era where podcasts tend to come and go. Wes is currently the Technology Integration and Innovation Specialist for the Cassie School in Oklahoma City, but he prefers the unofficial title Technology Fear Therapist, something he strives at on a daily basis, helping students and teachers alike. During the COVID-19 global pandemic, he's been sheltering in place in Oklahoma City with his wife, Shelly, 2 adult children, 16-year-old daughter, and of course, 2 golden retrievers. And it's really my honor today to introduce my colleague, Dr. Wes Fryer.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. And boy, kudos to all of the Mountain Moot organizers. Thanks to the sponsors. What an incredible opportunity. You know, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we lament in this time of the global pandemic. But I absolutely think that the Mountain Moot and the chance to connect in the ways that we're connecting and not only learn, you know, synchronously right now, but be able to continue to learn together is just phenomenal. And while we're going to talk today about different ways in which
Ryan, we have a short interlude, technical difficulties. Hopefully Ryan will bring back Wes.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. That was my fault. Wes, please accept my apologies for demoting you to attendee. We are back on now. Please continue.
slide deck and you go. It's something that, you know, needs to be done in the evening when, you know, beverages are available and things like that. But anyway, yes, we're going to talk today. Okay, have I unmuted myself? There we go. All right. So yes, flexibility is the key, not only to air power, as we talk about in the Air Force, but, you know, to blended learning and whatever form learning is taking. So the opportunity to be able to connect with you all today and learn synchronously is a privilege and a real gift as we contemplate what is going to be happening in just a few weeks in our schools, whether we're going to return face-to-face or we're going to be completely remote. It's going to be some kind of a hybrid blend. We certainly have things that we lament and miss, and we want to seize opportunities that when we can be synchronously connecting, and especially when we have chances to be in person. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of affordances. And so hopefully today's discussion is going to provide you with some additional questions and resources and really provoke you to think about the ways as a teacher, no matter what hat of teaching you find yourself in, whether it is, you know, yourself as a learner with your colleagues, with your family members, or you're in a formal teaching situation now where you're, you know, putting together coursework and class activities. Literacy changes. It changes with the times because the modalities and the medium through which we are communicated to and we communicate with others change. And so we're going to talk about those kinds of issues. Today, of course, on our Mountain Moot Moodle, you can access the slides that are shared on Google Slides. And I've also created, along with my partner in crime, I've got several of these. So Jason is definitely one of my key colleagues and collaborators on a weekly basis. And Brian Turnbaugh, who's up in Chicagoland, he and I have been working for the really last year on a lot of resources that are now collected together on a website. And so you can go to that. If you see the QR code in any of the slides, you can hold up your smartphone camera, or if you need an app on your device to read a QR code, it'll take you right to that resource, and you can use that shortened link. I'd also encourage you to use the hashtag for the conference MTMoot. Specifically, if there's anything related to these issues we'll talk about today, I've been using the hashtag ConCW for Conspiracies and Culture Wars. And if you want to use that, feel free. Of course, we never know who might hijack the hashtag tomorrow, but so far, it's one of the good things about not being viral is, the number of trolls. We haven't had any there, so not to say that won't happen. But what I'd like to do this morning is to start out with a story. And this is a story. In fact, do we have a poll, Ryan, that we can push out to people? I think we do. And the question I want to share with you is, have you encountered a conspiracy theory on social media this summer? So I'm going to guess that there are a few of us that have. My story is pretty recent, and it involves Facebook, and it involves my wife. And so about 2 weeks ago, my wife was reading through her Facebook and saw this post. And let me say at the very outset here, I am not going to be sharing a political message today. All right. I am not here to try to sway anyone to a particular political party or a particular political viewpoint. But what I am going to encourage us all to do is, as Neil Postman would say, and this is a bit crass, but these were the words that he used in his books and literature, which I highly recommend, developing our crap detector, developing our abilities to be able to discern whether content and information is valid, the source, and what we should do with that. And so the results here, if you can see those, is 87% of us have encountered a conspiracy theory. And so that's actually what ended up happening. My wife started to read this Facebook post from a friend of ours, whose name, of course, I have obscured to protect the innocent. I'm not wanting to call anybody out here, but she was reading this to me, and I said, stop, hun, is there a link? Do we know the source? And so she went to the very bottom of this extensive post, and those acronyms, WWG1, WGA, were at the bottom. And so I said, why don't you Google that? And she did. And of course, what came up first was a Wikipedia article for an organization called QAnon. And let me tell you, I would really prefer not to have to know about this at all and not to have to talk about this. But one of the things that has happened as social media has been increasingly weaponized by individuals and groups, some of whom we believe represent nation states, others represent different kinds of organizations, but a lot of folks have weaponized social media. And so today, we are in a place where probably a majority of us, if we're on Facebook particularly, are encountering things that are being shared, in this case by a very, fringe conspiracy group that believes that a child sex trafficking ring that's international, involving high-ranking officials of political parties, Hollywood actors, that they're responsible for pulling the strings of making world events happen. Certainly, conspiracy theories are not anything new. I don't have another poll for this, but probably in the 87% of you all who said you encountered a conspiracy theory this summer, one of them might have been this Plandemic video. This was an alleged documentary which was created by someone who very much wanted to share what could be called disinformation and might even be considered malinformation, as we talk a little bit about vocabulary. And so and please let me not represent myself falsely. I do not have this all figured out. In fact, I am messing up regularly. And in the case of this Plandemic video, if I could go back in time, I would change the way I interacted with somebody on Facebook because it didn't go well. And so this is part of what I want to talk about today. We all need to, sharpen our skills, kind of sharpen the saw, as it were, in terms of how we're going to be determining validity and determining whether or not we want to be listening and paying attention to this idea and source, and also whether we're sharing it. Hey, look at that. Dynamic polls that just appear. Did you encounter pandemic? This was an article in the Atlantic in May that was, offering some suggestions about how we might respond. And that's a very important question, which I believe will not only be relevant today in the summer of 2020, as we're, in the just still initial months of this global pandemic, it's going to continue to be an important question. So this is how I chose to respond to this post that a friend of both my wife and I shared on Facebook. I mean, I didn't want to be confrontational and accusatory. I tried to take an informational tone, saying that the source was revealed at the bottom of this post, and this is the Wikipedia page. And then I said, the messages of this group are surfacing much more frequently. And so it's important for us to know how to recognize those messages. I really like metaphors. I like stories. And I love maps. Geography was one of my majors as an undergraduate student. And I think that, and I also was a Boy Scout, right? I'm an Eagle Scout. So like learning orienteering and how to use a map, like not a Google map, but like a real map, that's a thing. Not quite as many people encounter pandemic, but over a third, 36% of our audience today, did encounter that. What do you do first when you have a map? Well, even if you don't have a map, what do you do when you go to a new place? You orient yourself. Where am I? Where's north? Where are some landmarks? And that is a good metaphor for what we're talking about today with our information environment. Because, like it or not, we are surrounded by psychological warfare, by operations that are being conducted in some cases by military groups and intelligence agencies, and we can be witting or unwitting participants in not only the consumption of these things that are being shared, but also the amplification, the further amplification of those things. So here are two little contentions that I'll share, and please feel free to quote me on this. I'm going to argue today that we have a very polluted information environment, and that we have an attention economy, because economies are defined by what's scarce, right? In that attention economy and polluted environment, media literacy and web literacy skills have become every bit as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic for everyone using the web. Okay, that means grandma and granddad, that means brother and sister, that means as soon as you are using the web and you're interacting with information, your skill set and your tool set really needs to be amped up and needs to improve, because the kind of information we're interacting with and the ways in which that information is not only affecting just the ideas that we think about, it's affecting real world events. So the second thing I'll say is that the ability to effectively filter and validate information before we consume further or share that information are essential skills for all of us. So whatever it is that you are teaching today, I want to encourage you to think about conversations that you can have with your students, because you may not be explicitly teaching a media literacy lesson, but our students literally can be living in a different culture than we are. That's even true if we're face to face. I don't have a slide in here about TikTok, but if you haven't been noticing the accelerated velocity of TikTok, I mean, I'm not a big fan of PewDiePie, but like he has had the #1 YouTube channel, and it took him like 10 years to build that. There are young people generally on TikTok who have built a following equal to PewDiePie, and they've done it in like a year. There's impacts to these kinds of things. So here's where we're going today. I want to start out with some questions. So we're going to use this idea of a map and being oriented as kind of a guiding metaphor. We are not, sadly, going to play a Kahoot, because as I rehearsed this with my wife last night, it just kind of took a little bit more time. But I have created for this presentation a 10-question media literacy Kahoot, and we will talk about some of the vocabulary terms that are in that. That's open, of course, available if you want to utilize that. But probably the most important part today is that I'm going to give you some homework. And as much as I would love to think that we can do kind of a Vulcan mind meld, my wife is the Trekkie fan in our house, in our marriage. I'm more of the Star Wars guy. But anyway, she's a Star Trek fan. And so, if we were Vulcan and we could do a mind meld, or perhaps if we could, time travel to the future when Elon Musk and his Neuralink technologies are even better. Isn't that going to be interesting when we can be jacking in, Matrix style? We're not able to do that. And we're going to have about 45 minutes today synchronously. What I hope to be is a filter for you to identify some of the most powerful and most provocative, in a very positive way, I'll call them media artifacts, that you could listen to or read that can really help widen your view and deepen your understanding of the information landscape that we're living in. And then also equally important are hopefully going to be some lesson ideas, and specifically a framework for web literacy and what some people would call information literacy, information fluency. There's different words for that, but how are we going to improve our skill set when it comes to dealing with this kind of information? So as a complete aside, I know that we have a lot of instructional designers in the audience. I would postulate that of the folks that are watching this live and those that will watch afterwards, a ton of us are creating instructional materials of some kind. And so here are 3 of my best tools. I learned about these incidentally from Tony Vincent. If you don't follow Tony on Twitter, actually on Instagram, he shares phenomenal stuff. Learned about these in Arizona. Hello, Peggy George, who's there today, at a conference a few years ago. Unsplash is a fantastic website where photographers give away the rights to their photos, and you legally don't have to even attribute. I often do, and you'll see some of the attribution here in my slideshow. That's the website that my 5th and 6th grade students, who I teach media and digital literacy to and with, are using for a lot of their projects. The other one is the Noun Project. I think it is important to think about when we want to use visuals and at what point does it become distracting and not helpful. But I almost wrote a book a few years ago called Talk with Media. I ended up going with the Playing with Media title, but being able to communicate visually is very, very important. And these are 2 fantastic tools that you're going to see me use. And then, of course, screenshots are important. And if you happen to be using a Mac laptop, a Mac OS laptop, Sketch is a tool that I use all the time for annotation. It's how I quickly blur out a face or a name, add some text and put some things together. So those are just a couple little asides, but sometimes those nuggets from a presentation end up being the best takeaway that you can practically apply right away. And by the way, let me encourage you, as I have a slide up here about questions, to put some questions in. We do have a Q&A panel that I think can come up, and it may not. I don't know, Dan, you may need to just prompt me, because as I'm sharing my slideshow, I don't know if that one is going to come up. But periodically we'll pause, and if there's a question that has come up, Dan or Ryan can interject, and we can have a little bit of interaction here during the presentation before we get to the end.
So I've got the panels open right now, and I'll just throw in a question from Susan Quinn. So what was your friend's response to your post?
So she didn't delete it, and there were some other people that followed her that one of them said, wow, I never knew this. This should be taught to all high school students in America. And I actually went back last night, and that had been deleted, but she left my original post. So I felt like that was positive, but I have not directly interacted with her any more than that. In the pandemic situation where I did something different, I mean, the person got really mad at me and they unfollowed me. They're actually somebody I go to church with, and that's a rather distressing. I was not wanting to sacrifice our relationship, based on my perception of, something that was shared being disinformation.
So I've got Lisa Mordio asking you to just repeat to follow Tony who?
Okay, yeah, Tony Vincent, and I probably should have included a slide for him. So hey, let's just go to Google right now and type his name in. His name is Tony Vincent. Oh wow, he has a Wikipedia article. Look at that. I don't know if that's him or not. His website is Learning in Hand. I follow him on Twitter at Tony. His handle is just Tony Vincent. We're going to test his website here. Twitter, I don't know if you saw this. Twitter actually had a compromise last night, and I I had some trouble posting, but this is where I learned the most from him, is on Twitter. And so he was in Arizona for a long time. He's back in Iowa and Council Bluffs. So that is him.
Great, and that concludes our questions for now.
All right, fantastic. Well, please keep the questions coming. One of the things I remember hearing a professor say, jokingly, but in seriousness is, and you've probably had this experience too, first day of class for maybe, undergraduate or graduate. Hey, everybody, what do you want to get out of this class? Well, so nice to hear that. Here's my 15-week, syllabus of exactly what we're going to do. It is important for us to be, to the degree we can, nimble and responsive to questions. And so it's a good thing to model. So please keep some questions coming, and we'll pause here as we go through these sections. Big question, where are we? From an information literacy perspective, where would you, and in the chat, actually, if you want to put that in, I don't know if we may have chat turned off, but that's a great thing to respond to. How would you describe where we are with information literacy? And then, the other thinking from that can be, how do we need to respond as a result? I brainstormed a bunch of questions to kind of get us started here. And again, my wife was providing good feedback. We cut like half of them. So these are five questions, but let me just ask these to see how this might provoke some thinking. Question number one, why is our information landscape so polluted? That would be a great topic to take on together with colleagues. I think that metaphor is very appropriate because there is a lot of pollution, but just because there's pollution, it doesn't mean there isn't great stuff. But why is it that the information landscape is polluted? One of the things that I have come to understand with greater depth, and some of the resources I'll be assigning to you, of course, no grade will be taken on this, for homework, is that in part it's polluted because there are people who want it to be polluted. There are folks who would like for us to actually become nihilists and just give up, give up on news, give up on journalism, give up on truth. I mean, that's a pretty epistemological, heavy statement, but there's reasons for this. It's not just an accident. Okay. Second, why is there so much confusion around the moon landings, the Apollo moon landings? This is something that came to my attention a couple years ago. Our daughter, our youngest, is now 16. And, she was asking about this, and she had been seeing videos on YouTube. And I realized, because of especially the YouTube algorithm at that time, which has been changed in some ways, she and her friends and her generation were being exposed to more conspiracy theory and hoax theory about things like, the moon landing than I believe any other prior generation. Okay. Discussions about the moon landing being a hoax have been around for a long, long time. But the way in which YouTube and its algorithm can be like a rabbit hole and can draw people, to more and more fringe content and outlier content, that actually was by design in terms of the way in which the algorithm was created. It's been created to maximize attention and watch time. But this is important, because we do have some historic lows in the amount of confidence and faith that people generally across society have in a lot of different institutions. And those are interesting graphs that we can track. I don't have those in the slideshow. That's a great question. I think that's a great question to dive into. And it's a question to ask students. I wonder how many students you'll be teaching this fall who think that we never landed on the moon, that there were Hollywood film actors that starred in that, and we had production technology in use in 1969. Spoiler alert, we didn't have the technology to fake that and to live stream that as much. And that's one of the lessons actually that I'll be mentioning today. Here's one my wife wondered if we should take out just because of how heavy it is and serious, but it's important to know that the weaponization of social media, and in this case, Facebook specifically, in Myanmar with the Muslim minority group, the Rohingya, has literally led to deaths. It's literally led to mob violence and vigilante killings in India and in other places. And so the platforms that have been created have in many ways spun beyond the control of their creators to the point where outcomes are happening in a sort of military sense. We would call this a kinetic impact. These are happening in the real world, physical world, not just in a virtual world or a world of ideas. How did this happen? I wonder how many people Facebook was employing that were native language speakers, in these countries when this genocide and this horrible immigration catastrophe was happening in Myanmar. How about this question? All right. We are all, I think, hopeful and anticipating a vaccine or multiple vaccines for COVID-19. But we also know that there is a very vocal group that is anti-vaccination, and they have had impacts in our schools and our communities in different ways. How are the voices and the perspectives of that community going to affect the provision and deployment of COVID-19 vaccines worldwide? That is a super important question. And what I'll say is that the conversations that we have opportunities to have around media literacy with our students, I think can provide a very, very important, if not antidote, a very important specific way of addressing these kinds of societal issues, which are big. This is my last question. We've got an election coming up in November here in the United States. We've got elections going on, all the time somewhere in the world. How can we, and don't just hear me say United States citizens, but human beings on planet Earth, how can we help ensure that elections are won via democratic means and not via disinformation campaigns? That's super important. And disinformation has played a huge role, and it is continuing to play a huge role in elections around the world. And it's important for us to understand this and to think about really why we need to be talking about this as citizens, whether or not we're teaching a civics class, this touches us all in our communities. So the last question, I guess I said that was last, I had one more. How can we safely talk about these issues with our students? Probably all of us have parents and families represented in our classrooms, with our students who are on all sides of the political spectrum. We certainly do at our school. And controversial issues can be difficult to talk about. We live in a very polarized age. And so I'll point this out. You may have noticed if you looked at the slides, but this is the only image that I actually repeat in today's slideshow. And it's because this is probably the most important idea about conversations. How can we have conversations about these things without breaking relationship, both with our family and friends and colleagues, but also with our students? So what I'd like to do now is a little vocabulary exercise. There is a Kahoot that is available that we could play, but I think what I'm going to choose to do instead is play a couple clips from some videos. But I created a 10-question Kahoot, and part of my rationale for this, I don't know if you've heard of this book before. My doctorate's in curriculum and instruction, so I kind of sometimes read books like this for fun. This is a bit dated. It's not super new, but E.D. Hirsch wrote a book called Cultural Literacy, What Every American Needs to Know. Now, there's a lot of very valid critiques of this, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the things that I think we've all been thinking more about this summer because of what happened with George Floyd and all the protests. Like, I'm not going to hold that up as this is the curriculum that we all need to have. There's a heck of a lot that's left out. But what Hirsch points out is that in order to have a conversation about something, let's say like genocide, it's important for us to have common things that we both know about and we've understood, like to have studied the Holocaust and to understand what happened there, or the Rwandan genocide or something like that. And so I'm going to argue that the demands of our information environment have changed cultural literacy, and therefore it's changed some of the things that we need to be talking about, and in this case, the vocabulary words that we need to be aware of. So I might be struck down by lightning if I did not mention Marshall McLuhan in this conversation, because McLuhan is arguably the preeminent theorist when it comes to media theory and media literacy. He coined the expression, the medium is the message. He died, I think, in 1980. If McLuhan was alive today, I feel very confident that he would be encouraging us to walk down this road together of looking at the medium, the way, and you all are distance learning experts. And we understand that the medium we're using, the platforms, mediate between conversations that we have, and they have an impact. In fact, they can be biased in some ways, and they can really, either promote or discourage, different kinds of interactions. And it's a big deal. We've got to talk about the medium. And so that's a big focus of what I hope to do today. So we're not going to do the Kahoot. I don't know if you've ever done this before. We're a geeky family. Maybe that doesn't surprise you, but like we've been known to do some Kahoots at holiday time, where everyone has their device and gets it out. Usually it's about things like, Harry Potter trivia or something like that. But three of the questions in that Kahoot are drawn from a book I want to commend to you. And it is by Whitney Phillips and Ryan Milner. It was published by MIT Press in April of 2020. And the book is called You Are Here, a field guide for navigating polarized speech, conspiracy theories, and our polluted media landscape. It's actually available free online on pubpub.org. I've got the link down there at the bottom. And one of the things that they share, I think, is this much more nuanced definition of what we would consider to be disinformation. I don't know if this analogy will connect with you, but I have, studied and read the book, The Love Languages. And I know I don't speak Greek, but, I've stayed at a Holiday Inn Express before. I have been told, and I have read, the Greeks, for instance, had multiple words to describe this thing called love. Well, we need to be using different words, I will argue, than fake news today. Fake news, unfortunately, has become a very political term that some people have used to try and encourage people in general to just give up on journalism and to give up on even the idea of truth. Instead of that, I really like these words that Phillips and Milner suggest: disinformation, which they define as false and misleading information that is deliberately spread; misinformation, which would be inadvertent spread of false and misleading information; and then the third category, malinformation. That would be information that has a basis in reality, but it's specifically spread to cause harm. Unfortunately, all of those things are happening today. And again, we can either be unwitting or cognizant participants in this as we receive information, we see it in different places, and we choose to like it, we choose to share it, or even just to consume it. Because some of the research that I'm going to cite to you and I'm going to recommend to you, it indicates that even being exposed to some of these things really affects our perception of the world. And so this is the reference here to Phillips and Milner's book, the QR code link there. I am not finished with it, but I'm continuing to go through this and really think it is an outstanding guide for us to become more aware of the information landscape that we're in today. So Dan and Ryan, do we have any other questions that have come up in the Q&A?
We do. From Cassie, we have: being in the teaching profession, we have to be aware or careful of what we post and how we engage in social media. What advice do you have for teachers who use social media and engage in disinformation?
So we have guidelines for social media, for as staff at our school. I think that, probably like we give advice to students. I mean, we need to think about anything that we share on any platform, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, anywhere else. We need to think about that message, being in the newspaper or, being printed on a piece of paper that we're having a conversation with our principal or our superintendent with, in the news media. It is true that anything that can be shared today publicly can potentially be viral. And so I think that is an important thing for us to consider and think about. I also think very strongly that we need to not allow that to scare us completely off of the platform, basically scare us off the web. And I remember my wife going to a Girl Scout meeting that law enforcement, there's like the Oklahoma FBI basically was leading, and he scared these moms so much, with terrible things that were on the internet, that literally they were all ready to throw away their computers at the end of the meeting. And I mean, we've all got to decide how we're going to raise our kids and to what degree we try to shelter them. But I think we need to be participating at some level in social media. And so in terms of disinformation, like the example that I kind of started with on the story, I think we want to keep reading articles and opinions about people who are wrestling with this. I think that if we decide, sometimes we don't want to be, if somebody's sharing disinformation or what we think is disinformation, we don't have to respond to all of that. And we certainly don't need to be confrontational with that. If it's possible for us to be able to, you know, on a factual basis, you know, share a different perspective, to be able to share another link. I don't know, we just have to choose our battles. And so I think that, I mean, and Jason can probably find it. There's another article besides that Atlantic one that I think we talked about on the EdTech Situation Room, giving different, you know, different pieces of advice with that. I don't know. Hopefully that's helpful. Any other questions?
Yes, we have one more anonymous question. What do you think the US's response to COVID-19 would be if our information literacy skills were better than they are now?
Gosh, I can give a pessimistic and an optimistic answer. My pessimistic answer is, I mean, we're just so, I'm a fan of Hamilton. I don't know if you all watched the original that Disney Plus streamed for the 4th of July. There's a line in there, we're outmanned and we're outgunned. We are truly, you know, outstaffed and just overwhelmed with the ways these platforms have advanced and the skill sets that we have. So I think aspirationally, this is part of what we need to be doing, is figuring out how to equip people with better digital literacy skills and media literacy skills, and being able to be better filters. At the same time, though, I think regulation is going to have to play a part in this. Tristan Harris, who I'm going to cite here in a minute, who has who has co-founded the Center for Humane Technology, will talk about this. I'm a big fan of this idea that we can publish at will, that I can share a presentation, and anybody connected to the internet, if it's not blocked and filtered in their country or in their location, I mean, they can access that. What Harris says is that freedom of speech shouldn't guarantee freedom of reach, and things like hate speech and things that are certainly malinformation in that definition we just talked about, those things need to be moderated and censored. And so, and then who gets to do that? And you know, the platforms and regulations, there's all of this these are big debates that are happening. So I think that we certainly could be in a better place if we had, you know, more uniformity in our national leadership, talking about the importance of media literacy and for instance, well, I want to avoid making very overt political statements. I think that everybody would be benefiting if we had more of a framework that was supportive of media literacy than we do today. And certainly not all of our national voices are supportive in that way.
That concludes our questions.
Awesome. This is great. Please keep the questions coming. So we are on segment number 3 here. I think we've got a little bit, we got about 18 minutes left, so I think we're doing okay. We're moving into the homework phase, all right? And so I will give you a spoiler, okay? I don't know have you been tracking your screen time? That's one of the things I like that, you know, both Android and iOS are doing better, is making us aware, ooh, what's happening with my screen time? So my homework is gonna involve potentially some more screen time for you and media consumption. But again, this is like why we would go to a university and have a program where we have a scholar and an expert. Like, share with me, you know, the best resources, the best information, the best perspectives. So here we go. This is the question that I'm responding to. And this could be a question that you could pose to your colleagues, to friends, to family members, as a filtering activity. What are the 5 most important media artifacts? Because I can't just say texts. I'm going to talk about podcasts and videos as well. Articles, books, you know, videos, podcasts, which could transform and deepen your understanding of the media landscape, okay? Its characteristics and requirements. So here we go. These are the 5. Before I do number 1, I'll do a shout out to an earlier version really of this presentation. Back in April of 2019, there's a wonderful conference called Atlas that I've had a chance to attend a couple times, and a workshop format that they have. I ended up sharing a session that I called Filtering the Exo Flood. I learned about Exo Flood when I worked for AT&T for a couple of years, right? It's this idea that we're just going to continue to have this massive tsunami of data, and that's going to put a lot of pressure on society, on the hard physical infrastructure that we have to bring internet, to our devices and our homes, etc. Filtering is essential. Okay, I want to encourage you to seek better skills of filtering, but then also empower others. How are they filtering? How are you deciding the voices and the sources that you're trusting? When you have a news source, how are you going to vet that? And then how do you decide what you're going to do with that information? So here is artifact number 1. And I have rated this personally mature audiences. That's not on their website. But the reason I say this is because this podcast episode involves a story about sexual assault in Mexico City. But this is from an excellent podcast called Reply All, that's from Gimlet Media. And it was from December of 2017. But this particular episode, if you listen to it, is going to potentially start you thinking about this rabbit hole of where pranking videos online and, viral content and internet trolls, but then also governments that would like to distract or also diffuse journalistic voices and perspectives. How does all this happen? And so this is a story about Mexico City. I actually lived in Mexico City for a year in 92, 93. And it also speaks to the fact that this is an international, issue and phenomenon that's happening right now with our media landscape. So I don't recommend that for, anybody under high school. Just be aware that it talks about a sexual assault situation, but it's from the perspective of the journalist who experienced it. You're going to learn about doxing. You're going to learn about Gamergate. You're going to learn about the ways in which internet trolls have operated and continue to operate. And it just is, it's kind of mind blowing. And so a shout out to Brian Turnbaugh, who was the one last summer, actually, when we were in Rhode Island for the Digital Literacy Institute, let me know about that. Artifact 2, I'm going to give you 60 seconds of today, all right? And this is a video. This is a fellow named Destin who has a YouTube channel called Smarter Every Day. As of last night, he has almost 8.4 million subscribers on his channel. I actually learned about him from our son, who is now working as a high school, or not just high school, as a college graduate. He's remote, working in the room here next to me. And he told me about this actually when I went to visit him out in Golden, Colorado at the School of Mines. Destin created a 3-part video series that focuses on the ways in which platforms, specifically YouTube and Facebook and Twitter, have been manipulated and weaponized. Now, this is a 20-minute video, and I'm going to acknowledge that this will be a bit delayed and out of sync. And I have done some things to my computer, some like fancy geek stuff, so that my audio, goes out through the same channel. So I think the audio will be okay. But I wanted to show you 60 seconds of this to give you a little bit of a taste of this. And then I want to encourage you to watch this, because if there were any videos that I have seen, let's say over the past year, that was just like, whoosh, like this is it. And this is the first of a 3-part series.
A couple of months ago, I made a Twitter thread about some weird activity I saw online. And after I posted that thread, tons of engineers from many different tech companies reached out to me privately to tell me their stories. My interest in all this started one day when I was scrolling on YouTube, and the algorithm served up a pretty weird video for me to watch. You know how the algorithm works, right? It looks at your past activity and tries to figure out what you could watch in the future that would keep you on the platform the longest. It optimizes watch time. The algorithm suggested I watch this video. Now, I'm not a super political guy, but I know those are important topics, and it had 138,000 views, and it was only 1 day old. So to me, this looked like it was a real news story. So when I clicked on the video, it got weird fast. Strange music starts playing, and a robot voice comes on and clearly starts reading me a script.
After Trump sends no...
Okay, I'm going to pause here. And again, I apologize that the quality of that, my recommendation for both our faculty and the one that I follow in terms of video is usually not to show it live in a synchronous video conference. And if you are, just, you can share that link, have people watch it, and then come back. But I want to give you a little taste of that, because we've heard about, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the ways in which algorithms are shaping our media landscape and our society. This is a real eye-opening video. in the description for this video, if you scroll down and you try and view some of the videos that he has referenced, they're gone. The channels have been terminated. The videos are not available. And that's because YouTube is conducting an ongoing campaign that I would argue is part of the culture war that is continuing in our society. And in fact, in January of 2019, YouTube announced that it was going to stop recommending conspiracy videos that harmfully misinform. That would be a malinformation video. This was a 9 to 5 Google article about that. And I think that, this is one of the things that makes it challenging to teach about this stuff, right? Because things change. But at the same time, this is kind of a whack-a-mole kind of situation, because as YouTube takes different countermeasures against people who are trying to manipulate their platform, the individuals who are trying to weaponize the platform do different things. And so it's a continual sort of cat and mouse game. In that video, importantly, you'll be introduced to this wonderful researcher, Renee DiResta. And Renee is at the Stanford Internet Observatory. She's an alum of the Mozilla Fellowship, and she is a fantastic researcher. She's written for Wired, and she's one of the people that I think you want to follow as you're continuing to learn more about our media landscape and, what's happening, sort of behind the scenes for a lot of this. Artifact number 3, this is a podcast just published in July of this month, July 8th. I've already mentioned him. This is Tristan Harris. He's the co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology. He was previously a design ethicist with Google, and this is called The World According to Q. He has a researcher on this episode, Travis View, who has spent several years researching QAnon and has some very valuable perspectives on how and why the ideas of this fringe conspiracy group has now become a part of mainstream media. In fact, there was a person attending the Trump rally just up the road from us in Tulsa, Oklahoma a few weeks ago, and photographed, holding a sign that referenced Q. You're going to hear, unfortunately, more and more about this. And there's actually candidates now who have won primary elections in different parts of the country who have either directly espoused these views, they've retweeted them. We've got some very prominent politicians that are in alignment with some of this. This is a fantastic podcast. All right, artifact number 4. It is not Anubis in person. It is a similarly somewhat mysterious and fascinating artifact. This is a whole podcast from the New York Times, but it's by Kevin Rose, and it's called Rabbit Hole. He subtitles this, "What is the internet doing to us?" What Kevin does in this 8-part podcast series is really take a look at the way conspiracy theory, and specifically the use of YouTube, has radicalized people in some cases, and the ones that he talks about are to white supremacist views, amplifying hate speech, and taking people down a very dark road. Fantastic podcast. And the very last artifact I want to recommend to you is a book that I have not finished but started, called Like War, The Weaponization of Social Media. And this is by Emerson Brooking and Peter Singer. And my colleague, Brian Turnbaugh, definitely recommends this as one of the best books to understand how battle is happening today. I did not serve a full career to be able to retire in the United States Air Force, but having had some background in military studies, it really blows my mind, and political science, right? That was my other major in college. It just blows my mind how information warfare and things that we might have studied and read about that happened in a distant place, propaganda has always been around us, but the ways in which the information landscape is the landscape of battle today is super important to understand. In fact, we need our students to understand this and to hopefully be motivated to be constructive agents inside this hostile environment, right? Because we've got very different worldviews that are competing today, and things like self-determination, things like human rights, things that really matter are being fought over, not using just bullets and knives and physical weapons, kinetic weapons, but also using information weapons. So conclusion here, really smart people are working on these challenges. They don't have them figured out yet. And I would say that's an important thing to help our students understand. Sometimes we, as teachers might misrepresent knowledge in a particular domain by saying, guys, here's all the information. It's been figured out. Your job is just to, learn it and give it back to me. No, there is a lot to learn that we've, historically, discovered and science has developed, technologies have developed, but there's so much that we've got to figure out today. And I think that, what we're talking about not only is in the realm of, computer science and technology and social media, this has to do with civics. This has to do with citizenship. This has to do with, how we are hopefully able to be informed and autonomous agents acting in our societies and in our communities. I've mentioned several different people on Twitter. I've actually compiled a list on Twitter, a media literacy list, and it has like over 100 people on it, but you can follow that list. You could also put it into tools like Flipboard, so that you can be able to, have that as part of your newspaper. I love to open up the app Flipboard on my phone or on my iPad, and I can take a look at what just those folks have been sharing recently. And this is part of the way that I think we can powerfully filter our information landscape, ascertaining who it is that we want to trust and how do I allow for ideas that they're sharing, articles and things like that, to come into my mind. All right. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about lessons. I want to commend to you a book by Stephen Lewandowski and John Cook. It's called The Conspiracy Theory Handbook. And John Cook specifically has done a lot of work around climate change and trying to figure out, like, why do so many people reject scientific consensus? And is there a way we can approach this educationally to help people have a more balanced and less fringe view of things like climate science. And one of the things I like about this book is that they start at the very beginning by saying, let's acknowledge that real conspiracy is all around us, right? Volkswagen did conspire to cheat emissions tests for their diesel engines. The tobacco industry did conspire to deceive the public about harmful health effects of smoking. There are real conspiracies, but there's also conspiracies that we would regard as not legitimate and fringe. And I think I just clicked the link to that book. So let me try to click my slide here to advance. Another resource that I want to recommend to you is Mike Holden. He has a fantastic, relatively new website he's set up called Infodemic, sifting through the coronavirus. The model that he has for information fluency is one that I'm teaching my students, and the acronym that he uses is SIFT, S to stop, especially when emotion is triggered, because if somebody is trying to play you, a lot of times they're trying to get an emotional response from you. The I is to investigate the source. The F is to find better coverage, and the T is to trace the claims, quotes, and media to their original context. And so Mike talks about how important it is to not look at the content of the claim, but the source. Can I take the source to be credible? And so this is just one example where he's talking about hovering in Twitter over their profile and, checking out if they're in a position to know about that, if they're a journalist, a reporter, if they're an expert. He also recommends adding Wikipedia. We are encountering news sources all the time now. It's like, what is that source? That's not the New York Times. That's not Fox News. That's not CNN. I've not heard of that before. And so basically every media outlet is going to have a Wikipedia page. And so helping students utilize Wikipedia in that way, you can go to the talk page and that'll show when there's controversy around a particular topic. And people disagree all the time about stuff, right? And so Wikipedia brokers those discussions. It's a very valuable source and can be an important tool for us to use as we're vetting sources. So John Cook was a co-author of this article that was in The Conversation in May, and it was called Coronavirus Plandemic and the 7 Traits of Conspiratorial Thinking. In the interest of time, actually, because I'm about out of time, I'm not going to play the part of this video, but he has a great video where he goes through these 7 traits. I have applied those to the Apollo moon landing along with Brian Turnbaugh. And so we've created a lesson that you're welcome to access. These are the 7 traits of conspiracy theory. And there's 2 videos that we suggest. having students watch and then consider those characteristics of conspiracy theory. So, conclusions. This was last night, okay? Our mayor in Oklahoma City just posted about our elevated COVID-19 case levels. And if you looked in the comment thread there were all kinds of arguments happening between, I think, mostly adults about articles, about science, about things like wearing masks. I'm pretty sure we're going to be encountering these kinds of situations on a regular basis in the days and weeks ahead. And so as your students, as our students are encountering links, how are we going to interrogate that source? How are we going to decide whether or not that is something we want to pay attention to and certainly something that we might want to pass along? How can we stay oriented? How can we help our students stay oriented? I'm convinced we need to have courage to have conversations. And I hope the resources and ideas that I've shared today will provoke some good conversations that you'll have. I would love to hear from you, resources and suggestions. Tune in on Wednesday nights. Join Jason and I if you want to, as we talk about some of these things. That's not a all media literacy podcast, but we talk about these issues from time to time, because truly you and I as educators are in an incredibly important role in our communities and in our society. And the conversations that we can provoke around these issues are very, very important. So you can visit my website, wesfryer.com/after, if you'd like to find more ways that you can continue to learn with me. And I want to thank everybody in the Mountain Moot for this opportunity to share ideas, and hope everyone has a fantastic rest of your day and great rest of the conference. Thank you all.